What is up, Tube users? I am the stereotypical gamer, and welcome back to another installment of Overwatch 2 Heroes, an in-depth guide. Today, we are talking about probably the most iconic character in all of Overwatch, Winston. Let's get right into things and talk about his primary fire. Winston's primary fire is Tesla Cannon. This is a frontal cone beam weapon that deals 60 damage per second. This will deal damage to any enemies in a 45-degree angle in front of Winston, up to a maximum range of only 8 meters. The good thing to note about this weapon is that both of his abilities can be used while continuously using his primary fire. While the range on this weapon isn't that great, his secondary fire makes up for that. Winston's secondary fire for his Tesla cannon is a hit scan beam that deals 15 damage at a minimum charge and 50 damage at maximum charge. It takes 1 second to fully charge to its maximum damage. Depending on the charge, Winston will consume between 4 and 12 ammo per shot. The range on this alternate fire is much longer than his primary, at 30 meters. One thing to note is that using Winston's jump pack ability will not cancel the charge, but using his barrier projectile or melee will cancel the charge. If the charge is interrupted in any way, the ammo will still be consumed. Now, let's talk about Winston's first ability. Winston's first ability is Barrier Projector. This is a bubbled-shaped barrier that is placed at Winston's feet and has a 5-meter radius all around from where it is placed. This barrier has 650 health and lasts up to 8 seconds. A few key things to note about this ability is the cooldown will start immediately upon activation. Also, if Winston is in the air when activating this ability, the bubble-shaped barrier will fall to the ground. Now, let's dive into Winston's next ability. Winston's second ability is Jump Pack. This ability allows Winston to leap into the air and slam back down to the ground, dealing an area of effect damage to enemies within its range. The damage for this ability is a maximum of 50 damage to enemies, down to a minimum of only 1 damage depending on the range. The max range for this damage is 5 meters from where Winston lands. The fall off damage for this ability starts at 1.3 meter radius around where Winston lands. Much like his projected barrier, the cooldown for this ability also starts upon activation. Now, let's move on to talking about Winston's ultimate ability. Winston's ultimate ability is Primal Rage. This ability causes Winston to go into a rage and start using his fist to attack and knock back enemies. Each hit deals 40 damage and knocks back enemies significantly. Upon activation of this ability, Winston's health is also restored, and he gains an extra 500 Norma health for a total of 1050 health in roll queue and 900 in all queue. One thing to note about this heal is anti-heal does not affect it, so Winston will heal to full even if he's antied by Ana. During his ultimate, the cooldown for his jump pack ability is reduced to 2 seconds. However, he cannot use his Tesla cannon or his barrier projector. After his ultimate ends, his Tesla cannon's ammo is fully reloaded if it wasn't previously. Now, with all of his abilities out of the way, let's dive into heroes that counter and are countered by Winston. Winston is a dive tank that excels at diving into enemies' backlines and isolating lone targets with his barrier, while also keeping himself shielded. A tank hero Winston plays well against is Zarya. With Winston's diving capabilities onto backlines, it can be pretty tough for Zarya to try and peel for her teammates. Plus, since Winston's primary fire does fairly low damage, it doesn't give Zarya's bubble targets enough charge for Zarya to become deadly. A DPS hero Winston plays well against is Widowmaker. Winston can easily dive onto any enemy Widowmaker wherever she is thanks to his jump pack. Plus, with his large health pool and armor, he can safely just close the gap on a Widowmaker without any worries of damage being taken. Finally, a support hero Winston plays well against is Ana. Ana is a hero that plays in her backlines of Ana is a hero that is played in the backline of fights for the most part. Because of this, Winston can easily dive her position and isolate her with his barrier without any trouble. And since Ana has no escapability, this matchup is not favorable for Ana. Now let's look at the flip side of things and talk about heroes that counter Winston. A tank hero that plays well against Winston is Doomfist. Doomfist usually plays in the same way that Winston does, where he wants to dive into enemy backlines rather than take the fight head on in the front line. Because of this, Winston and Doomfist won't really fight each other too often, and it comes down to a race of who can finish off whose backline first. And I would usually place my money on Doomfist winning that battle because of his disruptability and his better self-sustain than Winston. As for a DPS hero that plays extremely well against Winston is Bastion. Bastion in turret form can melt an opposing Winston through his barrier fairly easily since Winston is such a large target. This matchup tends to be a nightmare for Winston players. Finally, a support hero that plays well against Winston is Brigitte. Brigitte's all about protecting her backlines. She's able to do a good bit of damage to Winston with her shield bash and primary melee while also healing allies that are nearby. Plus her whip shot ability can boop a diving Winston away from the backline. Now that we've gone over counters for Winston, let's dive into some tips and tricks for the Monkey Man. My first tip, and a really important one, is when you're using your jump pack ability, try and get as much airtime as possible. The cooldown for the jump pack ability is only 5 seconds, and typically when you have a lot of hang time, you're in the air for an extended period of time, most enemies aren't going to track you in the air. You're either going to be just out of their range up too high for them to really do any damage, or they mainly just stick to shooting at ground targets, so you're kind of just safe up in the air. And so this way you're basically shortening the cooldown of your jump pack ability when you are up in the air longer. So it can be a good way to just be able to use that ability to escape if you dive in with that ability. Another important tip I have is that while Winston's projected barrier is a really good way to shield yourself or to protect allies or something like that, it can also be a really good tool to isolate an enemy away from their teammates. I mean, most healing abilities can't go through barriers, and this is a full domed barrier when it's placed, so placing an enemy inside that can be really tough for their allies to try and heal them. As for Winston's ult, it can be pretty tough to get kills just because it does do not a whole lot of damage, and plus there's so much knockback it can be hard to just try and get allies with it. So typically I use it more as a zoning tool. The knockback on it is significant, so it can be a really good tool to get enemies off of different points or off the payload and stuff. And the health that you get is crucial, so typically I will only use my ult when I start to get really low. I'll typically, if I have it, I'll dive in to enemies and be more aggressive than usual, and then if I start to get low, I'll pop my ultimate and just try and go to town getting enemies out of positions and stuff. Although I do know that really good Winstons do know how to juggle an enemy, as it were, and that, I mean, I feel like I'm pretty well versed in Winston, but his ultimate is still super tough for me to try and juggle an enemy just because of how unpredictable it can be, and just how much knockback there is. You really can only juggle enemies if there's like a wall or inside of a room, so that way they're more isolated in a certain position. Another tip I have, and it's something that I've made the mistake countless times, is if you are close to a ledge, Winston does place his projected barrier a little bit in front of him, and it's really never enough to notice that much, but you can notice it if you're close to a ledge and will just fall off the ledge if you're trying to keep it up top. So something to look out for if you're playing close to a ledge. But yeah, that's all the tips and tricks I have for you today. Make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed the video. Comment any other tips and tricks you have for Winston. It'd be much appreciated. And hit that subscribe. Catch you in the next one. Peace.